How many Victoria Crosses have you sold?
Well, over the period of 20 years, approximately 60.
And of the, 1,400 odd, slightly less than 1,400 that have been issued, how many have, to your knowledge, made their way through sale rooms?
Well, quite a surprisingly large number. Of the 60 which I have sold, 1 or 2 have in fact come up a second time during the 20-year period. But over the years, it's estimated that certainly over half have in fact appeared on the commercial market.
What was the cheapest one?
Well, of course, prices change all the time. When I first went to Sotheby's, no VC had ever made £1,000, or in fact anything approaching it, and you could buy really quite a good VC for £300 or £400. But as with everything else, as with every other type of collectible object, prices have risen enormously as the years have gone by, and now the very cheapest VC, if you look at it in simple commercial terms, is probably something like £6,000 or £7,000.
And the dearest one you can think of?
Well, the dearest one is £110,000. That record was set about 4 years ago now, and it was for a very interesting and also very, very rare VC won by the RAF in the Second World War. But arguably that price was a little misleading, because the RAF Museum were very anxious to acquire that particular medal, and unbeknown to them, when their representatives at the sale started bidding for the cross, a well-wisher, if you like, also thought to himself, well, I would like to buy this cross and be able to present it to the RAF Museum. And the two parties bid against each other right up to this very high price of £110,000, when arguably, had they not bid against each other and just left other bidders to have dropped out, it could have made quite a lot less than that.
Laying that one aside then, what's the most surprisingly priced one that you can think of?
Well, and several spring to mind, but I should think the one that sticks in my mind particularly was a Great War VC won by a man called Henry Tandy. Now, his was a very fine VC. It was a very fine group of medals, not least the reason being that it contained 2 other medals for gallantry. Now, this is most unusual. You see, you tend to find that the man who wins the VC wins it by exhibiting enormous bravery, if you like, on the spur of the moment. But this particular man, Tandy, not only had won the VC, but prior to winning the VC, he'd also won the military medal and the Distinguished Conduct Medal. So from the collector's point of view, the group of medals containing 3 separate awards for bravery was a very desirable item. Now, there had been a fair bit of publicity before the sale took place, and Tandy was a native of Coventry, the only VC winner, if you like, from the city of Coventry. And when the sale had been announced, an appeal had been mounted in Coventry, because the city very much wanted to buy this item for the benefit of the city itself. And surprisingly, some would argue, a very large amount of money was raised. So the representative of the city of Coventry, I have a feeling it was the Lord Mayor, came along to the sale and started the bidding. But the same publicity before the sale had attracted, and obviously, as it turned out, wealthy private individual who had not bought VCs before, or not in fact had bought any medals before this particular sale. And the 2 of them fought it out until eventually the group was sold to the private individual for £26,000. Now, not only was this a record price for a VC at the time, but it exceeded the previous record price by almost £10,000, which was quite astonishing, given the circumstances at that particular moment.
In the main, and in your professional view, are the greater part of them sold to collectors or to actual investors?
Well, a number of private collectors are often very unwilling to give any indication as to why they have purchased the VC, and it is possible, therefore, that they have an eye on the investment potential. In fact, it would be naive of them not to, because of the sums of money which are now involved. But having said that, my own experience of a very large number of different types of collectors over the 20 years that I was associated with the selling of these medals leads me to think that the vast majority of private buyers were true collectors in the real sense of the word, and any investment potential was a very secondary matter as far as they were concerned.
Given then your particular and peculiar availability to these things, have you ever considered owning one yourself?
Oh yes, I mean, over the years there have been a number that I particularly liked. There are two, in fact, which I would have very much liked to have owned. I have to confess that I never bid for them, but had I been able to do so, there were two. The first one was to a merchant navy captain. This one appealed to me personally because I happen to be very interested in steamships, and this particular man had been the captain of a troop transport in the Great War that had been attacked and subsequently sunk by a U-boat. And here was a very glamorous incident of the captain of the ship going down with his ship on the bridge. Large numbers of the troops aboard had been saved, thank goodness, but it was a most interesting award from the academic point of view, because it was the first time that any VC for an action on the sea had ever been awarded to somebody who wasn't a member of the Navy, and this man was a civilian. The other one that I particularly liked, I think, was to Company Sergeant Major Hollis. This one was sold just a few years ago now, and it was particularly interesting because it was the only VC that had been awarded on D-Day. And if you stop to think about the vast numbers of men involved on what was happening on D-Day and the 2 or 3 days immediately following D-Day, the more I thought about it, the more I was fascinated by the fact that the authorities had only authorised one VC for arguably the most momentous events of the Second World War, and I should have loved to have owned that.
What kind of investment opportunities have medals achieved in general terms?
Well, looking at the financial side of things over the 20 years that I've been associated with it, I think you could say without any exaggeration that prices have gone up in leaps and bounds. As I said a moment ago, 20 years ago, no VC had ever reached a 4-figure sum, and in fact a pretty good one could be bought for less than £500. Well, now we're in a situation where the best VC that money can buy is in the 6-figure range, and even the most ordinary is fast approaching 10,000. And in fact, that sort of price increase has shown itself right across the board with other military and naval campaign medals, as well as gallantry medals.
What's your personal view of people selling them at all?
Well, I've always held the view that they are possessions in the way that, if you like, the contents of one's house is one's possessions, and there is no reason why they shouldn't sell them. My own experience is that, if we take the VC in particular, is that the recipients of the VCs themselves never sell them. There have only been 1 or 2 instances recorded in modern times where a recipient himself has parted with his medal, and I certainly have not dealt with one of those individuals. Occasionally you find that the widow of a VC will sell. More frequently it's the children or the succeeding generations. But I would stress to you that over all the years I've been associated with them, the buying and selling of VCs is a highly emotional business. And although I have personally handled the sale of about 60, I would say there have probably been half as many again, which were left for sale, where the people had signed on the dotted line, if you like, and had agreed to go ahead with the sale, but before the sale ever took place, they'd had second thoughts, and we had returned the medals to them because they just couldn't go through with it.
Tell me, how many holders of Victoria Crosses have you met?
Well, despite the contact that I've had with VCs over the years, I've only actually met a surprisingly small number. Mainly, I think, because as I said a moment ago, the recipients themselves are not considering a sale, even in the most extreme cases. But also, my experience of VC winners is that they are a very, very shy lot of people who go to sometimes extraordinary lengths to hide the fact that they have won the VC themselves. The normal reason for me meeting a VC recipient in the flesh is because we have sold a VC which perhaps was awarded to a colleague, or they themselves perhaps fought in the same battle, or for whatever reason you like to imagine, the sale of a particular VC attracts some VC winners along to look at the medals, to perhaps attend the sale, and in doing so they identify themselves as they would have to do in order to examine the medals, and that's how one meets them. But unless they were challenged to identify themselves, my feeling is that most of them would certainly not identify themselves and would prefer to just come in very, very quietly and leave equally quietly if they could have done so.
Given your interest in these things in general terms, then, can you tell me which Victoria Cross holder you would perhaps have liked most to meet, had you had the opportunity to meet any?
That's a very difficult one to answer, because the VC has been won by such an astonishing variety of people. A lot of VC winners were by nature very flamboyant characters, I think, and if you like, almost destined to win the VC. By comparison, the majority of VC winners were very modest and unassuming people, and probably no one in their wildest dreams would ever have thought that here was the type of man who would have won the VC. So this is a very interesting but difficult question to answer. I think if I was put right on the spot, I think I would have liked to have met Jack Cornwell. He was the young boy, because he was only a boy, let's face it, he was very little more than 16, who won the VC during the Great War. It was a very, very famous event, a very famous chain of events that led to the winning of this VC. He became a sort of folk hero. But if you examine, even very dispassionately, what this lad did to win the VC, bearing in mind his extreme youth, I think I would have liked to have met and talked to him, see what sort of a chap he was.
Turning then more directly to Mr. Collis, how do you sum up the circumstances in total, as it were, which seem to surround the sale of this particular medal in the first place, or at all?
Well, I suppose if you look at the buying and the selling of the medal since it was originally awarded, so if you look at the history of the sale of this particular medal, I suppose the one word that would sum it all up would be controversial, because here we have one of only 8 VCs which were forfeited under the original rules of the institution of the VC, which, as I'm sure you're aware, were revoked eventually in 1920, so none have been forfeited in modern times. This was a rather old-fashioned concept. And the first record we have of the medal being on the open market, if you like, was a sale just before the war, the last war that is, at Glendinning's, the London auctioneers, where it appeared for sale and was purchased by a man called Oakley. Now, Colonel Oakley was a very well-known medal collector of the years between the wars, and in fact, when he died, I think in about 1950, the bulk of his collection was sold. Now, as it happened, Collis's VC and a number of other medals, which were, if you like, his personal favourites, were retained by his family in a little glass case in the memory of father and father's very extensive collection, until another death in the family, in fact, in 1979, resulted in this little group of medals left over from Colonel Oakley's original big collection, were put back onto the market, if you like. Now, we sold the cross in 1979, and it realised £5,800. But at the sale, or in the, if you like, in the 1 or 2 days leading up to the sale, and then particularly immediately after the sale, an observer at the sale questioned the legality of the sale. And when I spoke to him, he said, well, because this cross was forfeited, surely it should never have been sold. It is the property of the Crown. Well, in my view, this was not a valid objection, but nevertheless, we put it to the buyer of the medals, and because he realised that if there was going to be some problem about the ownership of the cross, and he might subsequently not have real title to this cross, it was decided that we would cancel the sale pending investigations. So the buyer was not asked to pay for it, but similarly it was not returned to the vendor, which was a representative of Colonel Oakley's family. Well, there was an awful lot of bureaucracy and red tape, which dragged on for over a year. But eventually, after a lot of consultation with the Ministry of Defence, with various museums, with Hancock's, the London jewellers who make the crosses, it was decided that there was no case for the VC to be owned by the Crown. It was perfectly legal for it to be sold, and whoever bought it had legal title to it. So we therefore put it up for sale a second time, and a suitable footnote was included in the catalogue to explain to potential buyers why the cross was being resold in apparently such a very short period. And because of what it said in this footnote, the cross had obviously attracted a certain notoriety, if you like, with the result that it actually sold for nearly £1,500 more than it had done on the previous occasion. Now, at that second sale, it was purchased by a private collector who, for his own reasons, wished to remain very anonymous. So I, as the auctioneer at the sale, was given a card on which his name was written, but he had asked for a pseudonym. So when he in fact was the successful bidder, and I brought down the hammer at 7,200, rather than call out his name, we just used a pseudonym so that he could remain anonymous. This is quite usual practice, where collectors don't want all the world and his wife knowing that they have purchased an object. Now, he's quite a wealthy individual with quite a number of medals, but I'm afraid that I still am not able to reveal his identity, but he still owns the medal, and I've no reason to suppose that he won't continue to own it for really quite a long time.
Finally then, will you tell me the story of the mystery man in the raincoat?
Yes, now this was very curious, because when Colonel Oakley's representative came to visit me and unpacked the medals which we were going to sell, and straight away I saw the Collis VC, my memory thought back to 1969. And I was called to the reception desk at Sotheby's on this particular day. The receptionist said, there's an elderly gentleman here with a medal to sell. Now, when I got to the counter, the man produced a box and took out what, at first glance, appeared to be a VC. So, of course, I was very excited. I picked the medal up, I turned it over to see what the name was, and the thing which struck me first of all was, unfortunately, the medal wasn't genuine. Now, there are many, many fake Victoria Crosses about. Again, my experience is that they were never really done to deceive and mislead a private collector. The normal reason was that either the recipient of the medal himself was frightened to wear it in case it got lost, or more frequently, because most copies of VCs that one sees are in fact quite old ones, more frequently the man had had to sell his VC and was so ashamed of having done so that he had a copy made in the hope that no one would ever notice. In any event, I picked this one up and I saw straight away that it didn't have the right distinguishing marks. There were various things about the engraved naming and this and that, and it was a copy, quite an old one, probably made around the turn of the century, I thought. And the name on this cross was Collis, Gunnar Collis. And I said to the man that unfortunately the medal was a copy, and to my great surprise, because he hadn't until that moment said anything, the man said, "Oh yes, I know it's a copy, but I still want to sell it if it's going to be worth selling." Well, on the basis that VCs are expensive medals and that many collectors cannot and probably may never be able to afford the genuine article, a good quality copy of the same style, particularly if it's engraved up with a specific name, is certainly a collectible item, but not for a great deal of money. So I said to the man, "Yes, well, I can certainly sell it for you, but it's not going to make very much. It's probably only going to make £25 or so." And the man, again, to my surprise, said, "Oh, well, I'll still sell it, even though that's all it's worth." So I took out a receipt and I said to the man, "May I have your name and address, please?" And the man said, "Collison. My name is Collison." And I said, "Well, this is quite an unusual coincidence, isn't it?" I said, "Are you in any way connected with this VC or the winner of this VC?" And again the man said, "Yes, the recipient, Gunnar Collis, was my father." And he said in his later years he was so upset at having lost his VC that he had this copy made, which he wore from time to time, not at anything official, of course, because he wasn't allowed to. But it, if you like, it had replaced the original one that he had had to forfeit way back in 1895. And I warmed to this man immediately because it struck me as being a very sad story. And we put the cross in, because it was, in fact, my own first experience of a forfeited VC, although in the years to come I sold another 2. But this story about Gunnar Collis and his forfeited cross really touched me rather a lot, and I gave a lot of thought to it, and we put it in the sale, and it sold, I think, for £35, which for a copy VC at that time was actually quite a good price. And then, as time went by, it went out of my mind. There were other medals to catalogue and other jobs to do. And so when Gunnar Collis's original cross came in, the first thing that occurred to me, before anything else, was I could, in my mind's eye, I could see Mr. Collison at the counter all those years before with the copy VC that the same man had won.